With me today on the show is Kristen Low from Lumus Imaging. Hey, Kristen, how you going?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Really good, thank you. It's great to have you on the show to be able to dive into, I guess, some of the workflow challenges and the logistics and the day-to-day around the imaging and radiology workflow and everything kind of in between and how technology plays a role in that. But firstly, to help us set the scene a bit more, Lumus Imaging, tell us a bit more about that and who it serves.
Lumus Imaging, we are a private radiology provider, so all forms of diagnostic imaging. I'm sure for those that are not well versed in what diagnostic imaging is, they will be familiar with terms like CT and ultrasound. We are a private practice with over 130 sites nationally and a number of reporting contracts to some of the major public hospitals, particularly in Victoria and New South Wales, or New South Wales now predominantly, I should say. And what that means is the service, the actual X-ray, is the service provided by the hospital. So it would be the hospital side that form it, but it's one of our radiologists who will actually report on the images. So where their expertise comes in the interpretation of whatever examination is performed.
Yeah, got you. Excellent. And what's your role at Lumus then?
The National Billing Manager, which doesn't really explain very well. I like to tongue-in-cheek say I'm pretty much the compliance officer. There are, in Australia, for your audience that is familiar with Medicare billing and the ancillary things like health funds, Veterans Affairs, etc. There are guidelines and rules regarding the eligibility for a service provider. So Lumus Imaging is the service provider to be able to claim Medicare. And what we have to make sure is that we are compliant where that is concerned. And it can be as basic as having a request for the exam being requested, or in terms of some of the specialty items that we use, some 2,000 plus items are billable for exams that we perform, making sure that the patient meets the eligibility criteria, whether that be from a clinical perspective, so the conditions that are being sought to be interpreted match the eligibility criteria, or in terms of a maximum number of services so that you're not having exams unnecessarily, as well as making sure that the other elements of eligibility criteria are met. The MBS will update periodically the schedule of benefits, either with indexation, an increase to the rebates being paid, or other changes such as new item numbers. And my responsibility is obviously to implement those within the software or the applications that we use within the practice. And I also play a big part in what's referred to in radiology circles as a RIS, a radiology information system, making sure that our RIS, as much as possible, correctly reflects what the patient is having done. So the procedure is the term that we would use, and matching the billable items to it, basically to mitigate the risk of incorrect billing. That's in a nutshell what I do.
Yeah, that's super important. Well, it sounds like you're the resident doer there at Lumus, so that speaks to me.
One of a team, absolutely.
Yes, of course. No, that is certainly important. Yes, but and actually on that point of team, you've got the team to keep the logistics and operations and patient engagement and flow happening. There's also the clinical side too, or the those that are I guess ensuring that tests are done. I'd love to understand a little bit more around like what the nuts and bolts look like, and I guess the workflow side, or the workload on seeing an average patient. Like, how long does it take for images to get done and patients to get through? Like, talk to me through some of that.
It really does depend on the examination that's being performed. A chest X-ray is probably one of the simplest procedures that we do, and provided the patient has no mobility or lucidity issues, or there's no language barriers, a chest X-ray can be done relatively quickly. Images are instant because everything is digital these days. So I've been around a long time in diagnostic imaging. We used to have to print films, like you used to have your photos printed off a camera, but everything is digital these days. So the images are sent to what's known as PACS, stands for Picture Archival Communication System, I think. And from there, the radiologist can bring up those images. They will interpret the images and provide a report to the requesting practitioner, whether that be the patient's GP or a specialist, or in some cases, allied health practitioners. And subsequently, those images are made available to the requesting practitioner, as well as a copy of the report. And in a normal case, you would present to your health practitioner with an issue. The health practitioner would determine what sort of imaging might be necessary and send you on for that exam. We perform the exam, interpreted, and the results are sent back to your requesting practitioner for follow-up accordingly. So it obviously aids in the diagnosis of patient conditions, or in many cases eliminates what something that isn't there, because the benefit of imaging is that you can see what you can't see externally with the naked eye. It can be very complex. A chest X-ray is probably, as I said, the simplest thing that we do, but we do some really complex interventional radiology. So that's where a procedure is performed with the use of imaging guidance. An example I'll use is an injection into a joint, whether that be a corticosteroid, or in the case of something like a frozen shoulder, an injection of a therapeutic substance is given to the patient using imaging as a guide to ensure that it gets to the area that needs to be targeted and hopefully offers the therapeutic benefit. Of course, like anything in the health, people's responses and the efficacy is variable, much like a doctor prescribing a medication. One patient it will be very effective for, and for another it won't work at all. So the length of time a patient is with us can really vary from as little as 30 minutes, a complete round trip from the moment they present to the front desk as an outpatient, to as much as a few hours. Nuclear medicine is one of the modalities in diagnostic imaging, and one of the examinations performed is a two-part examination separated by a period of about 3 or 4 hours with the imaging done later. And there's one examination that I can think of that's done over the course, imaging at different intervals over the course of 3 to 5 days. So it really can vary in terms of how long a patient is with us based on what is being done.
Yeah. Now, there's some complexities there. A couple of minutes to a couple of days. That's I've oversimplified it there, but that's it does paint a picture of I guess a lot of different workflows and requirements there. And it sounds like, when you touched on it earlier about, there is digitization, there's optimization, and I guess some benefits that have come there. I imagine there's a lot of challenges for the radiologists too. I'd love to understand a little bit more from you what you think some of the biggest challenges are that you see the radiologists face on a day-to-day.
Yeah, certainly. I think that more so now than ever before. And the analogy I'll use is in the training of new clerical staff. As I said, I've been in diagnostic imaging for a long time. When I started, there weren't as many modalities available as there are today, and the complexity of the examination types performed didn't exist. So what I learnt was the basics. And then as new modalities or new procedures were introduced, we learned about those. And when we're trying to train new staff today, there's a lot more information for them to know straight up. And of course, technology has moved along with the times, and we've got better tools than we had back in the 90s when I was starting out. It means that those tools are there, but that also is something else to learn. And I think the same could be said of the radiologist. You're not just reporting on plain X-ray films or general ultrasound. The ultrasound is more complex because there have been advances in that technology, certainly across things like CT scanning and MRI. We've seen some really major developments in that space. And of course, a radiologist has to be able to keep up with all of those advances in order to report correctly and identify what they're seeing on the images. Our requesting practitioners rely on our radiologist's expertise because a GP may very clearly see a fractured wrist on an X-ray image, but looking at the complexities underneath that about what the potential is for damage to other areas really does take that specialist perspective, and that's where a radiologist comes in. And so not only do they have to be able to interpret all those different modalities, of course, everyone's busy. They have to do it in a timely manner and somehow manage to keep up with those changes and make sure that they're adopting any changes to the workflow. Things are changing all the time. We get at least 2 major updates from Medicare each year, and they often come with new approved item numbers. So we may have been doing a procedure for any number of years, but there hasn't been a Medicare item that you could bill for it. So it's known in our world as a non-rebatable examination. And so they also have to keep up with the very broad aspects of correct billing. That's the focus of my role. So I think for a radiologist today, it's just as challenging as it has always been, but I would assert that there are more challenges now because of the technology and our ability. That technology has given us the ability to look more deeply or in more detail than ever before, but with that come an additional set of challenges.
Yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword sometimes, isn't it? On one hand, the challenges are presented because there's, I guess, fast-paced innovation, new tools, things to learn, and added complexity. At the same time, there's opportunity to deliver better patient care, get results through faster, perhaps more accuracy, a lot of other kind of benefits too. So, I'm on that. I'd be interested to know then a bit more, diving into the kind of next level in terms of how Lumus Imaging is using some technology to address some of these issues. Talk me through, I guess, your approach to that.
Look, there's a number of applications that I would say each are an equally important cog in the wheel, but I'm sure if we were having this discussion with our application owners within the business, they might assert that theirs is more important than the other. But we do have the RIS, so that's our patient database. That is the source of truth for every examination that is performed, the transaction history for any billing information, as well as obviously the demographic information. So that's the keeper of everything. The PACS, as I mentioned before, which is where the images are stored. In this day of voice recognition software, most of our radiologists will dictate using voice recognition. So there's another major application there. And some of the perhaps more modality-specific technology that we've embraced are things like the ability to electronically generate an ultrasound, the measurements taken on ultrasound. So, for example, if the patient has presented with a vascular issue and they go along and look to have an ultrasound that identifies what those vascular issues might be, there's some mapping and measurements taken, and there's an electronic version of that. Previously, it was done manually by the sonographer, so there's some technology there. And then in the billing space where I work predominantly, everything is electronic these days. So if I hark back to the dark ages when I started, a claim form was a manual process, as was a bulk bill claim form that you swiped it through a machine. And for many of the younger audience, they won't have a clue what I'm talking about, a credit card machine. But that's how
the clicky clack one, the one that you clicky clack.
Zhung zhung in our world, that's what we call it. But that's what it has advanced to, and so of course, technology brings with it lots of benefits. But when something goes wrong, it can obviously be quite crippling. So unlike in the past, if your X-ray machine was working, you could still take the X-ray, you could still develop the images, and the radiologist could still report them because he was using a handheld dictaphone. And in the case of a major outage of the RIS, you could get out a typewriter and type up a report. When we rely very heavily on digital technology, and there is no way without it these days, obviously the challenges with that are keeping it up to date and making sure that the functionality exists so that it is consistently effective and it can do all of those things. And then those applications have to talk with each other. So there has to be a significant amount of integration to make sure that the requirements of patient privacy are maintained. Everything has to be encrypted to make sure that it is secure and not easily visible to any person. So there are certainly some very clever IT people who work in not just for Lumus Imaging, but in this industry, making sure that all of the guidelines, there are some international standards when it comes to the image quality. It's known as the DICOM standards, so digital imaging standards for the quality of the images. You know, it's not just an image taken off your phone camera, as well as international standards for the way that medical information, personal information, is transmitted electronically, and that can be from within systems within the same business to external services, such as feeding back a report and the images to a hospital system or to a GP clinic's practice management software. So there are certainly some big ticket stuff that we have to all keep running smoothly. It is definitely a challenge making sure that the tools that you're using are the most effective for the work that you are trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly higher stakes in terms of, I guess, the operational flow, like you kind of laid out there in terms of the use of the tech. And when it goes well, it goes really well. But you need those reliable tools to be able to run effectively. One of those tools I want to dive into in particular was mPower clinical analytics. So where does that fit into, I guess, the whole tech stack and the work it does at Lumus?
The beauty of something like mPower as a standalone from an analytical side, I'll separate that out and answer that part next. But because of its integration with the voice recognition software, it means that we're not recreating all of that, the coding that's required. Every single procedure we have has a unique code. For the systems that talk to each other via what's known as HL7 integration, they have unique codes. Obviously, everything has to be unique. That's the only way any computer language can work out what it needs to do. And then the benefit of mPower already being associated with PS360, the voice recognition software, means that we didn't have to recreate everything from scratch. And because that integration is there, when we started using mPower, we weren't building anything. We were working off the databases that were already in existence with vernacular and coding that was already familiar to us. So what the words that we use, the way we refer to it on our side, has translated to mPower. And the ability to be able to analyze what we've done, not just from a procedure level, saying that it's a CT scan of the abdomen and pelvis, actually being able to analyze the content of the radiologist's report to either verify that or to identify where perhaps it hasn't been put through correctly. We are all human. Humans register the patients. Humans perform the x-rays. Humans report the x-rays. And so we need to be sure that from a quality perspective, what we are issuing is what the patient had done. And mPower has allowed us to actually look at that in more depth on a much larger scale and with much quicker turnaround times.
Yeah, interesting. That sounds like a few benefits there in terms of on the billing side, that you got to make sure that's accurate, and it sounds like there's also the quality piece there too, and helping a few different stakeholders. I want to dive into how it's helping each of them in a second, but did you separate out something about the clinical analytics piece as well, and the wanting to kind of speak on both? Like, was there more to touch on there?
Well, I think where I personally have found the biggest benefit is the content of the report gives me lots of clues about whether the billing is correct. And so I use a keyword, or in most cases keywords, in terms of searching for things that don't match. So I'm either looking at a subset of procedures, and if they include a particular word or phrase, or they don't include a particular word or phrase, you've got the option of both, I want to single those ones out. And previously, the only way for us to do that was actually line item by line item, check them individually. What I can do with mPower is actually identify what might not be correct, and we can double check that against the billed data. So if we were to perform, say, nationally around 300 CT brains on any given day, and I have a concern about some of the billing for those, I can actually input the parameters that I've determined, and the results I get are the subset that are most likely the ones that need to be checked. Prior to mPower Analytics, I would have had to check each of those manually. It's just not feasible. So the ability to be able to look at potentially incorrectly billed examinations means that what I'm actually asking my team to target are more likely to produce results and eliminate those false positives, or eliminate the ones that don't need to be looked at because they were done correctly, and mPower won't include them in the search results. So we can look for something, or we can look for something that doesn't include something. So being able to do both in terms of that. And then obviously the ability to drill down by modality, dates, the usual parameters that would be a part of any sort of reporting database. But not only that, it's looking at where the work is being performed, who are the types of practitioners requesting that work, and even who are the reporting radiologists providing that. So where we perhaps identify a billing-related issue, not only am I identifying the issue, I'm actually able to target where it's occurring, who it's occurring with, and what that can actually identify is a different approach to a training or a knowledge gap. So when you send out a general communication saying, we've noticed that this isn't correct, please make sure you're checking and provide instructions on how to. Unless it's specifically directed, sometimes it will be lost in the ether. And no, we do it right. We don't need to worry about that. When you identify, when you are able to drill down at that level quickly and identify where that is, you can actually target that specifically. And I definitely find that more effective. And of course, if we are billing incorrectly, that is non-compliant, and there is the potential for repercussions in terms of that. So making sure that we are doing it correctly to the best of our ability is really a key element of my role, and being able to do that quickly means that I'm not impacting revenue assurance. And I would absolutely say that mPower Analytics has given me the tools to be able to do that more effectively, to the turnaround time on that. So we're not holding off submitting claims for days at a time whilst we check the work. We're actually able to look at what's going on as soon as it's been done, if we like. We check it once a day, identify what needs to be reviewed and checked on a specific basis, apply those changes, and the end result is a better consistency in correct billing.
Yeah, no, that's pretty clever. And as you're speaking to, you mentioned compliance, because I was thinking, it sounds like there's, it's great to hear about a tool that helps with a particular, I've got a particular patient, I need to be able to perform a task right now for a test, or I've got something to do right now. But surely being able to have that information on easy recall helps for things like audits and recalls and other kind of things like that. That historical compliance piece is sounds like it's covered as well.
Absolutely, definitely. There's lots of elements of mPower that I really like in terms of any other tools that I've used before. I would have to say I think that the functionality around keyword searching does include or doesn't include has been really integral in terms of allowing for that capacity. It just allows a broader spectrum of capturing potential results, but at the same time not having to run multiple searches using different parameters. They can all go into the same report, and I'm confident about the results that we're getting in terms of the search results that are returned based on the parameters that I use.
Yeah. Hey, one thing I'm thinking as well while you're talking is that my background is also a bit of a resident doer within healthcare in implementing technology, more within primary care. But I know sometimes it can be an absolute punish to be able to introduce new technology into a healthcare setting, particularly if for those working within the clinic that have come from typewriters and zhuv machines and utilize different tools at different times. In terms of implementing, I guess the onboarding piece and the integration, I think you actually touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think that's a really important one too, because so often, you see, the like, okay, this is great, this has potential to kind of work in our practice or like within our setting, but then when the rubber hits the road, you try and plug it all into all the existing pieces, and everyone's used to doing things in different ways. You go, oh, hang on a sec, this isn't gonna fly. There's always going to be road bumps in any implementation, but how do you find that? I'm always fascinated by the implementation process of a technology, so I'd love to hear any insights you've got.
Organically, I think one of the elements of my role has been something similar along those lines. And perhaps it speaks to, because I've worked in diagnostic imaging, I've been in healthcare admin, generally speaking, for, let's say, since around about 1990. So for quite some time, a long time, all right? And obviously seen lots of changes. Based on that experience, and where I'm talking about this organic progression of that is an ability. It's not unique to me. It is an ability to identify what kind of troubleshooting. So we know it's going to work under A, B, C circumstances, but what happens when it's X, Y, and Z? And one thing I do know that in, I would say broadly, the medical profession, but certainly in diagnostic imaging, there is an exception to every rule that we put in place, and being able to make sure that the tools that we use and the technology that we have on board is able to cater for those exceptions is a really key element. And the exceptions aren't the norm. So often when things go wrong, it's usually because it's something that's not performed all the time. You know yourself, in anything, if you do a task once a year, I used to work in, my role was more a financial role. So changing the payroll year was a once a year task. And it took me 3 or 4 years to learn how to do that without following my instructions. If you do something every day, by the end of a few days, you should know what you're doing, right? It's not unique to any particular industry. It is evident in all aspects of life. Those ones that generally throw a spanner are the ones that aren't performed all the time. And sometimes the benefit you get from either someone with a long history or someone who's used to performing a troubleshooting role is that flagging when it's not going to work. Because if you can make your technology work when something is not working, so identifying the something that's not working and be able to resolve it, then your day-to-day, the stuff you do all the time, should be seamless, that there would be an expectation. And so I think that the length of time that I've been working in this industry, you've seen lots of scenarios across that, and you're actually able to say, okay, if we're looking at implementing this, what happens when this occurs? What happens when you've got two patients with the same name, or two patients with the same date of birth, or they're on two different, known as an external system. So the example I'll use is the patient has been an inpatient of two different hospitals, both with external electronic systems where they need a unique identifier. We need to be able to make sure that what we're sending back goes to the right one. And so there has to be troubleshooting. There has to be something put in place to make sure that those sorts of issues are identified but before they start piling up and you've got to resolve something that's causing a few people headaches. You touched on it before with something like the speed with which we get back the results, that turnaround time, it's known as. For a patient, if I just look at it from our customers, are our patients and our requesting practitioners. But if there's something wrong, most people would be worried about it. And the most significant time frame for that is the period between identifying the issue and a diagnosis. It's the waiting when you can't do anything about it. You're not the expert in diagnostic imaging. You can't go and prescribe a medication that you can take. For most people, they can't do any sort of therapy without some guidance. And so it's that period of the not knowing. The better we can get that technology working seamlessly means that we are meeting that requirement for all of our patients and hopefully contributing to a prompt diagnosis and the subsequent treatment that may be required. As diagnostic imaging providers, that part is not something that we do. We take the images, we interpret the images, and we let the practitioner know what we think is the result, but the treatment is incumbent on the requesting practitioner, making sure that we have that service available and being able to quickly identify and resolve issues is just as important as having someone available to take the X-ray and someone to report the X-ray.
No, I love diving into the nitty-gritty of how these things work. It's something that we can often gloss over when talking about the potential of technology and how it might revolutionize things. To be able to bring it to specifics has been super helpful to understand how that actually fits in. And I guess it highlights a point earlier that we kind of touched on implementations or introducing new technology into a setting. You explained this well too, is that if you're not thinking about those exceptions, then that's where things usually fall down. And the way you understand what those exceptions are is involving the people who are doing it the most on a day-to-day. So you see too often a new technology be introduced into any healthcare setting, big or small, and if it's just lumped onto people at the end and done through a project team that hasn't got that full visibility of the day-to-day, then that can be value. And sometimes it can be a little bit annoying getting the frontline people in, because they might be like, oh, no, you haven't thought about this, haven't thought about that. But much better to get it done at the front end rather than when it's gone live. So, that would be my recommendation to anyone.
I have said on more than one occasion that when creating a RIS, when writing a RIS, you should absolutely involve frontline staff. They know where things should go. They know the organic flow of collecting patient demographic data. A technologist, a radiographer will know the organic flow of the process through which you grab the patient from the waiting room through when you send them back out. And you're very right that the identifying those, whoever's on the front line in whatever element of the technology that is in play, it is a really key element. It's all well and good to have an understanding of what the program does and be able to teach that. It's the real world scenarios that really test the mettle of any application. And that's not just in healthcare. It is perhaps particularly important in healthcare because we are dealing with a patient's health. So there are absolutely privacy issues and other issues that need to be factored in accordance with that.
Yeah. Hey, with mPower too, like I was just thinking, it sounds like it's, on the from the logistical operations admin side and the billing piece, it makes things easier and addresses some issues there. We've talked about how there's different team members involved that are utilizing the platform. So I guess if you were to summarize some of the key benefits then for all those different stakeholders within the setting, what would that be?
Nationally, looking at what we're billing and where we're billing it, like I touched on before, what we've audited or analysed in the past hasn't always had, we've not always had the capacity to identify where. So we identify an issue, let people know, correct it, but we perhaps haven't got the information. It was available, it was just the time taken to extract that. And one of the things that mPower Analytics has really allowed me to do is to include that information from the get-go, because it is part of the search results that we're given. And en masse, particularly for a large diagnostic imaging company like ours, we do over 3 million examinations a year. That's a lot of examinations to audit. Being able to exclude the ones that we don't need to look at is really beneficial, and it actually does allow us to do it. If I talk in specifics in terms of searches for a moment, so we could search a particular modality, and then within that modality, I can actually identify the exams I want to include or exclude, or we can look at everything using a keyword such as a region of the body or an examination type. Obviously, date specifics, that one's a given, or being able to really audit what a single site is doing. So, all right, let's have a look at this. If perhaps a mistake is identified, that's not only is that corrected, we're actually then able to perhaps have a look and see whether there are some knowledge gaps, and do we need to address those in terms of their overall understanding of that billing. As I touched on before, one of the key elements is compliance. We have to be compliant. We don't decide what to charge. Medicare will tell us what is allowed. And then within each of those, there are eligibility requirements. And as the technology gets better and as the exams become more complex, as do those eligibility requirements. So it's really important that we quickly and easily identify where there might be an issue and then be able to look at ways to rectify it, because that does maintain our compliance with the governing bodies that we have to report to and remain compliant with in terms of imaging guidelines and within the industry.
No, that's nicely summarised. I guess lastly then, thinking about those radiologists, support staff and everyone in between that might be working in this space. It's a fast-moving environment, lots of challenges like everyone has in healthcare. If there was, whether it be key bits of advice or a key piece of information for someone to take away and have a think about, or where they should be prioritising some of their time, what reflections do you have there?
Sometimes the benefit is perhaps understated. I'll use a specific example. CT of the coronary arteries requires additional additional accreditation for a radiologist to be eligible to not only report them but claim the item number. And one of the things that the benefits I see for a radiologist in using mPower Analytics is I don't have to keep track of the stuff I do separately. I can actually easily identify the work that I've done, again, looking at just addressing those specific ones or overall. So when you are trying to maintain your professional development, CPD, continuous professional development, it can actually provide you the tools with which to be able to do that. So I know I've focused on the billing side of things and how we utilize it, but the benefit of having a software that analyzes what you're doing, where you're doing it, when you're doing it, and how it's reported means that the options for maximizing its potential, I haven't come across something that I haven't been able to do yet. And I don't think we really even scratch the surface within the company that I work for. I feel we maximize it from a billing perspective, but there are lots of other areas that mPower Analytics would have a benefit. And the radiologist example I've just given, it is exactly that. Turnaround times, looking at making sure that not only are we compliant from a billing perspective, but in terms of those industry guidelines I was talking about before, our protocols, are we adhering to the industry standard protocols and things like that? So I think that the potential is perhaps not limitless, but certainly there's lots and lots of potential there for it to be a tool that enhances what you're doing, not because it helps you interpret the images any differently or more quickly provide the report, but actually shows you what you're doing in a way that you can measure whatever it is that you need to measure.
No, I really appreciate your honest reflections there and some of those really specific examples that have helped us kind of understand how these technologies can have an impact. And it's exciting to know that there's potential to come too, Kristen. So thanks for making the time to have a chat today on the show, and looking forward to checking in at some point later in the future and learning more about that, what lies ahead. So thank you so much.
You are very welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Talking HealthTech. Make sure you like and subscribe and share this episode with someone who might find it valuable. For more information and resources about healthcare innovation, visit talkinghealthtech.com.